You don't turn your back on family, even when they do.
On screen, they were brothers, but behind the cameras, they were enemies. The feud between Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and Vin Diesel wasn't just a clash of egos. It was a war that nearly tore apart a billion-dollar franchise. Fast and Furious sold the world a simple promise: family. Yet off-set, family turned into the most explosive conflict Hollywood has seen in decades. One man controlled the franchise from the very beginning. The other walked in, stole the spotlight, and refused to play second fiddle. What started as late arrivals, script rewrites, and quiet tension soon spiraled into Instagram callouts, ironclad contracts about who could win a fight, and a studio forced to keep its stars apart. In the end, the question wasn't just about cars, stunts, or box office. It was about power. Who truly ruled Fast and Furious, Vin Diesel or The Rock? To understand this feud, you need to understand the empire it was built on. Back in 2001, The Fast and the Furious wasn't expected to launch a cultural phenomenon. It was a street racing film inspired by a magazine article, built on muscle cars, hip-hop beats, and nitrous oxide. But it exploded into something bigger. By the mid-2000s, the franchise was pulling in hundreds of millions worldwide. And by the time it crossed the billion-dollar mark, it wasn't just about cars anymore. It was about identity, loyalty, and one word Hollywood knew would sell across the globe: family. At the heart of that family was Vin Diesel. From the very beginning, Diesel wasn't just Dominic Toretto. He was the brand. He had producer credits, creative control, and the respect of Universal Pictures. He was the face on the posters, the voice in the trailers, and the one who declared, both on and off screen, "We don't turn our back on family."
You don't turn your back on family, even when they do.
But by 2010, Universal had a problem. The saga was big, but not big enough. Audiences were getting tired of street races and small-time heists. The studio needed a new spark, something that could transform Fast and Furious into a true global blockbuster. And that's when they turned to Dwayne Johnson. By then, The Rock wasn't just a former WWE superstar. He was box office gold. With films like The Scorpion King and Journey 2, he had already proven he could sell tickets. But more importantly, he had charisma, discipline, and the kind of larger-than-life presence that could stand toe-to-toe with Diesel's Dominic Toretto. When Johnson debuted as Luke Hobbs in Fast 5, 2011, the franchise instantly leveled up. Critics called him the adrenaline shot the series desperately needed. Fans loved the contrast: Toretto's brooding cool against Hobbs' brute force intensity. The result? Fast 5 grossed over $600 million worldwide, nearly doubling the previous film's total. The message was clear. The Rock wasn't just joining the family, he was redefining it. And suddenly, for the first time in a decade, Vin Diesel wasn't the only alpha on set. Two egos, two styles, two visions for what the franchise should be. And that's where the storm began brewing. By 2016, the cracks were no longer hidden. On the set of The Fate of the Furious, whispers of tension turned into open warfare, the kind that Hollywood hadn't seen in years. It all started with an Instagram post. Dwayne Johnson, usually the most diplomatic star in Hollywood, suddenly broke character. In a message to his fans, he praised his female co-stars as amazing professionals, but then dropped a grenade. My male co-stars, however, are a different story. Some conduct themselves as stand-up men. Others are spineless, candy asses. The internet erupted. For days, fans debated who Johnson was talking about. Insiders didn't need to guess. Everyone pointed to Vin Diesel. Behind closed doors, the same stories kept surfacing. Diesel showing up hours late. Diesel demanding rewrites to make Dominic Toretto look tougher. Diesel dragging out production schedules. On a small movie, these habits might have been annoying. On The Fate of the Furious, they were catastrophic. This was a billion-dollar franchise shooting across Cuba, Iceland, and New York City. Each day of production cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Crews blocked entire streets. Ice roads had to be carved out for car chases. When Diesel delayed filming, the ripple effects were massive. And for Johnson, a man built on military-level discipline and 4 a.m. workouts, this wasn't just unprofessional. It was a direct insult to the craft. As one crew member later admitted, you could feel the tension. Diesel saw Fast as his family, his kingdom. Rock saw it as a job where respect mattered. Those worlds collided. Soon, the tension became impossible to ignore. Rumors spread that Diesel and Johnson refused to film scenes together. Watch Fate of the Furious closely. Most of their interactions are cut together through editing. Universal had two of the biggest action stars in the world, who couldn't even share a frame. The feud only grew when Johnson doubled down. In interviews, he admitted the post was real. He called the situation fundamental differences in philosophy. He didn't name Diesel, but the message was loud and clear. This wasn't just gossip, it was war. Diesel, for his part, tried to play it cool. "We're still family," he told reporters, echoing the very word that had become the franchise's brand. But even that line felt more like spin than sincerity. Behind the scenes, things were even messier. Reports leaked that Diesel, Johnson, and even Jason Statham had clauses in their contracts. They could never lose a fight on screen. Every punch, every kick had to be balanced. Fight scenes weren't just choreography, they were political negotiations. Who hit harder? Who got back up faster? Who walked away looking strongest? For Universal, it was a nightmare. This was supposed to be their crown jewel, the franchise that guaranteed $1 billion worldwide. Instead, it became a power struggle between two alphas who refused to bow. The solution? Keep them apart. By the time Fate of the Furious hit theaters in 2017, the damage was obvious. The movie made money, over $1 billion worldwide, but the cast chemistry was fractured. Johnson's Luke Hobbs had become too popular to cut, yet too volatile to keep in the same sandbox as Diesel. Universal's answer was bold: spin him off. Thus, Hobbs Shaw was born, pairing Johnson with Jason Statham in a film of their own. On screen, it looked like expansion. In reality, it was damage control, a way to keep the franchise alive without letting its two biggest stars destroy it from the inside. The Rock put it bluntly in an interview: "We're fundamentally different. We approach the business differently." Diesel countered with his trademark word, "We're still family." But by then, the world had already chosen sides. This wasn't just a feud. It was a full-blown civil war inside one of Hollywood's biggest franchises. And as the smoke cleared, one truth became undeniable. Fast and Furious was no longer one family. It was two kingdoms, and neither king was willing to surrender. When the dust settled, Universal had a billion-dollar dilemma. They couldn't afford to lose Vin Diesel, the face of Dominic Toretto, the man who had carried the franchise for nearly 2 decades. But they couldn't afford to lose The Rock either. His arrival had supercharged the box office and brought in a new global audience. So the studio made a choice: separate them. That choice became Hobbs & Shaw in 2019, a spin-off pairing Dwayne Johnson with Jason Statham. On paper, it looked like a smart move: expand the universe, cash in on the chemistry fans loved, and keep the feud contained. Behind the curtain, though, it was damage control. Universal had learned the hard way. Put Vin and Dwayne on the same set, and sparks turned into fire. Hobbs & Shaw made over $750 million worldwide, proving Johnson's star power could stand on its own. For Johnson, it was validation. He didn't need the Fast family to dominate box offices. For Diesel, it was a reminder. The kingdom he had built was no longer his alone. But the feud didn't stop there. During press tours, Diesel began dropping cryptic comments, suggesting that he had given tough love to Johnson on set, even taking credit for pushing The Rock to deliver better performances. Johnson's response was swift and ice-cold. He called Diesel's remarks laughable, making it clear the truce was nowhere in sight. For years, the two operated in parallel universes. Diesel remained at the helm of the main Fast saga. Johnson built his empire with Hobbs & Shaw, Jumanji, and other blockbusters. Both men thrived, but the shadow of their feud lingered. Fans constantly speculated, would the two ever reunite, or was the family truly broken beyond repair? Then came 2021. As Fast 9 rolled out, Diesel made a very public plea. On Instagram, he begged Johnson to return for the franchise's finale, framing it as a duty to fans and a promise to Paul Walker's legacy. But to Johnson, it wasn't a heartfelt call. It was manipulation. He publicly rejected Diesel's plea, saying he had already told Vin months earlier, in private, that he wouldn't come back. "I didn't like the way he brought up Paul's children in that post," Johnson said. "Leave them out of it. We talked about this privately, not on social media." It seemed final. The Rock was out, the bridge burned. But Hollywood has a way of rewriting its own script. In 2023, when Fast X premiered, audiences were stunned by a mid-credits scene. Luke Hobbs, The Rock himself, walked back into the franchise. Fans erupted. Had the feud finally ended? The truth was less sentimental. By then, the Fast saga was losing steam. Box office numbers were dipping, and Universal needed a shock to reignite the franchise. Johnson agreed to return, but on his own terms. No scenes directly with Diesel, and full creative control over Hobbs's next chapter. In other words, peace, but only the kind negotiated in a boardroom. Today the feud is quieter, but far from forgotten. Diesel remains the symbolic head of the Fast family. Johnson is the outsider who proved he didn't need the family to succeed. Together, they've carved one of the most notorious rivalries in modern Hollywood. And maybe that's the irony. The word that defined the franchise, family, was the very thing that tore it apart. For audiences, it's a reminder. Behind every billion-dollar smile and brotherly handshake on screen, there can be a war raging just out of sight. In the end, the feud between Dwayne Johnson and Vin Diesel wasn't just about later rivals or fight scenes. It was about something bigger: power. Hollywood has always been a battlefield of egos, but what made this story so explosive was the scale. Two of the most bankable stars in the world, fighting not over a role, but over control of a billion-dollar empire. And when that empire's very brand was family, the irony became impossible to ignore. The Rock saw the franchise as a job, a place where discipline, respect, and professionalism mattered most. Diesel saw it as his kingdom, a legacy he had built, and a family he believed he owned. Neither man was wrong, but together, they were never going to be right. For Universal, the lesson was clear. Sometimes the only way to keep the machine running is to keep the alphas apart. That's how Hobbs and Shaw was born. That's why Fast X brought Hobbs back. Not because the feud vanished, but because the money demanded it. So when fans cheer at the sight of Toretto and Hobbs on screen again, they're celebrating more than action. They're watching the uneasy truce of two men who turned their real-life rivalry into box office fuel. And maybe that's the true legacy of this feud. A reminder that behind every smile, handshake, and toast to family in Hollywood, there's always someone fighting for the driver's seat.